The story of Oliver Twist. Oliver begins life in a hard way. Some years ago, when the poorhouses of England were in a bad state, and the poor people housed within them were often ill-treated, a little waif began his life under the roof of one of the worst of them. His mother had wandered there, weak, wretched, and without friends, it seemed, for she gave no clue to her identity. And after her little boy was born, she had only strength enough to kiss him once before she breathed her last. As no one knew anything about her, the child became a charge upon the parish. He was sent with other orphans and homeless little ones to be cared for by an elderly woman named Mrs. Mann, who received from the parish officers but a scant allowance for the needs of the children, to whom she gave, in the shape of food and attention, a still shorter return. And so the first years of this child's life were devoted mainly to the struggle to keep body and soul together. He won the fight by the narrowest of margins, and his 9th birthday found him a pale, thin lad, somewhat short in stature and decidedly small in girth. But nature had placed a good sturdy spirit in his breast. It had plenty of room to expand, thanks to the spare diet, else he might not have had any 9th birthday at all. On this momentous day he received a visitor, in the person of Mr. Bumble, the fat and pompous beadle of the workhouse, who came to see Mrs. Mann in all the glory of his cocked hat and brass buttons. "Good morning, ma'am," said the beadle, taking out a leathern pocketbook. "The child that was half-baptized Oliver Twist is 9-year-old today." "Bless him," interposed Mrs. Mann, inflaming her left eye with the corner of her apron. And notwithstanding a offered reward of £10, which was afterwards increased to £20, notwithstanding the most superlative, and, I may say, supernatural exertions on the part of this parish, said Bumble, "we have never been able to discover who is his father, or what was his mother's settlement, name, or condition." Mrs. Mann raised her hands in astonishment, but added, after a moment's reflection, "How comes he to have any name at all, then?" The beadle drew himself up with great pride and said, "I invented it." "You, Mr. Bumble?" "I, Mrs. Mann. We name our foundlings in alphabetical order. The last was a S, Swubble I named him. This was a T, Twist I named him. The next one as comes will be Unwin, and the next Vilkins. I have got names ready-made to the end of the alphabet, and all the way through it again, when we come to Z." "Why, you're quite a literary character, sir," said Mrs. Mann. "Well, well," said the beadle, evidently gratified with the compliment. "Perhaps I may be, but the boy Oliver being now too old to remain here, the board have determined to have him back into the house. I have come out myself to take him there, so let me see him at once." "I'll fetch him directly," said Mrs. Mann, leaving the room for that purpose. And so Oliver, having had as much of the outer coat of dirt which encrusted his face and hands removed as could be scrubbed off in one washing, was presently led into the room. "Make a bow to the gentleman, Oliver," said Mrs. Mann. Oliver made a bow, which was divided between the beadle on the chair and the cocked hat on the table. "Will you go along with me, Oliver?" said Mr. Bumble in a majestic voice. Oliver was about to say that he would go along with anybody with great readiness, when, glancing upwards, he caught sight of Mrs. Mann, who had got behind the beadle's chair, and was shaking her fist at him with a furious countenance. He took the hint at once, for the fist had been too often impressed upon his body not to be deeply impressed upon his memory. "Will she go with me?" he inquired. "No, she can't," replied Mr. Bumble, "but she'll come and see you sometimes." This was no very great consolation to the child. Young as he was, however, he had sense enough to pretend great regret at going away. It was no very difficult matter for the boy to call the tears into his eyes. Hunger and recent ill-usage are great assistants if you want to cry, and Oliver cried very naturally indeed. Mrs. Mann gave him 1,000 embraces, and, what Oliver wanted a great deal more, a piece of bread and butter, lest he should seem too hungry when he got to the workhouse. With the slice of bread in his hand, and the little brown-cloth parish cap on his head, the boy was then led away by Mr. Bumble from the wretched home where one kind word or look had never lighted the gloom of his infant years. Mr. Bumble walked on with long strides, and little Oliver, firmly grasping his gold-laced cuff, trotted beside him, inquiring at the end of every quarter of a mile whether they were nearly there. To these interrogations, Mr. Bumble returned very brief and snappish replies, for was he not a beadle? But at last they were there, and the boy was looking at his new home with interest not unmixed with dread. Oliver had not been within the walls of the workhouse a quarter of an hour, and had scarcely completed the slice of bread, when Mr. Bumble, who had handed him over to the care of an old woman, returned, and, telling him it was a board night, took him before that august body forthwith. "Bow to the board," said Bumble. Oliver brushed away 2 or 3 tears that were lingering in his eyes, and seeing no board but the table, fortunately bowed to that. "What's your name, boy?" said a gentleman in a high chair. Oliver was frightened at the sight of so many fat, red-faced gentlemen, and the beadle gave him another tap behind, which made him cry. These two causes made him answer in a very low and hesitating voice, whereupon a gentleman in a white waistcoat said he was a fool, which was a capital way of raising his spirits and putting him quite at his ease. "Boy," said the gentleman in the high chair, "listen to me. You know you're an orphan, I suppose." "What's that, sir?" inquired poor Oliver. "The boy is a fool, I thought he was," said the gentleman in the white waistcoat. "Hush," said the gentleman who had spoken first. "You know you've got no father or mother, and that you were brought up by the parish, don't you?" "Yes, sir," replied Oliver, weeping bitterly. "What are you crying for?" inquired the gentleman in the white waistcoat, and to be sure it was very extraordinary. What could the boy be crying for? "I hope you say your prayers every night," said another gentleman in a gruff voice, "and pray for the people who feed you, and take care of you like a Christian." "Yes, sir," stammered the boy. The gentleman who spoke last was unconsciously right. It would have been very like a Christian, and a marvelously good Christian too, if Oliver had prayed for the people who fed and took care of him. But he hadn't, because nobody had taught him. "Well, you have come here to be educated, and taught a useful trade," said the red-faced gentleman in the high chair. "So you'll begin to pick oakum tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock, added the surly one in the white waistcoat. For the combination of both these blessings in the one simple process of picking oakum, Oliver bowed low, by the direction of the beadle, and was hurried away to a large ward, where, on a rough hard bed, he sobbed himself to sleep. Poor Oliver, he little knew, as he fell asleep, that the board had just reached a sage decision in his and other cases. But they had, and this was it. The members of this board were very wise men, and when they came to turn their attention to the workhouse, they found out at once, what ordinary folks would never have discovered, that the poor people liked it. "Oh ho," said the board, "we'll stop all this high living in no time." So they brought the diet down to the edge of starvation. They contracted with the waterworks to lay on an unlimited supply of water, and with a mill to supply small quantities of oatmeal, and issued 3 meals of thin gruel a day and half a roll on Sundays. For the first 6 months after Oliver Twist was removed, the system was in full operation. It was rather expensive at first, in consequence of the increase in the undertaker's bill, and the necessity of taking in the clothes of all the paupers, which fluttered loosely on their wasted, shrunken forms, after a week or two's gruel. But the number of workhouse inmates got thin as well as the paupers, and the board were delighted. The room in which the boys were fed was a large stone hall, with a copper kettle at one end, out of which the master, dressed in an apron for the purpose, and assisted by 1 or 2 women, ladled the gruel at meal times. Of this festive composition each boy had 1 porringer and no more, except on occasions of great public rejoicing, when he had 2 ounces and a quarter of bread besides. The bowls never wanted washing. The boys polished them with their spoons till they shone again, and when they had performed this operation, which never took very long, the spoons being nearly as large as the bowls, they would sit staring at the kettle with eager eyes, as if they could have devoured the very bricks of which it was composed, employing themselves, meanwhile, in sucking their fingers, with the view of catching up any stray splashes of gruel that might have been cast thereon. Oliver asks for more. Oliver asks for more. Boys have generally excellent appetites. Oliver Twist and his companions suffered the tortures of slow starvation for 3 months, until at last they got so voracious and wild with hunger that one boy, who was tall for his age and hadn't been used to that sort of thing, for his father had kept a small cook's shop, hinted darkly to his companions that unless he had another basin of gruel, he was afraid he might eat the boy who slept next him, who happened to be a weakly youth of tender age. He had a wild, hungry eye, and they implicitly believed him. A council was held, and lots were cast to decide who should walk up to the master after supper that evening and ask for more, and it fell to Oliver Twist. The evening arrived, and the boys took their places. The master, in his cook's uniform, stationed himself at the kettle. His pauper assistants ranged themselves behind him. The gruel was served out, and a long grace was said over the short rations. The gruel disappeared, the boys whispered to each other and winked at Oliver, while his next neighbors nudged him. Child as he was desperate with hunger and reckless with misery. He rose from the table and advancing to the master, basin and spoon in hand, said, somewhat alarmed at his own temerity, "Please, sir, I want some more." The master was a fat, healthy man, but he turned very pale. He gazed in stupefied astonishment on the small rebel for some seconds, and then clung for support to the copper. The assistants were paralyzed with wonder, the boys with fear. "What?" said the master at length in a faint voice. "Please, sir," replied Oliver, "I want some more." The master aimed a blow at Oliver's head with the ladle, pinioned him in his arms, and shrieked aloud for the beetle. The board were sitting in solemn conclave, when Mr. Bumble rushed into the room in great excitement, and, addressing the gentleman in the high chair, said, "Mr. Limbkins, I beg your pardon, sir. Oliver Twist has asked for more." There was a general start. Horror was depicted on every countenance. "For more," said Mr. Limbkins. "Compose yourself, Bumble, and answer me distinctly. Do I understand that he asked for more, after he had eaten the supper allotted by the dietary?" "He did, sir," replied Bumble. "That boy will be hung," said the gentleman in the white waistcoat. "I know that boy will be hung." Nobody disputed this opinion. An animated discussion took place. Oliver was ordered into instant confinement, and a bill was posted on the outside of the gate, offering a reward of £5 to anybody who would take Oliver Twist off the hands of the parish. In other words, £5 and Oliver Twist were offered to any man or woman who wanted an apprentice to any trade, business, or calling. Oliver had a very narrow escape a few days later, as the result of this bill, from a villainous-looking man who wanted a chimney sweep. But finally he became the apprentice of an undertaker named Sowerberry. His life here was some improvement over the workhouse, but still hard enough. Nevertheless, he did get enough to eat, in the shape of broken victuals, and he slept among the coffins in the shop. Unfortunately, there was another apprentice, a great overgrown fellow named Noah Claypole, who delighted to bully Oliver in every way possible. Oliver stood it as long as he could, but Noah mistook his attitude for cowardice and added insults to rough usage. But one day, Noah spoke ill of the boy's dead mother. "What did you say?" asked Oliver quickly. "A regular right-down bad she was workus," repeated Noah coolly. Crimson with fury, Oliver started up, overthrew the chair and table, seized Noah by the throat, shook him, in the violence of his rage, till his teeth chattered in his head, and collecting his whole force into one heavy blow, felled him to the ground. A minute ago, the boy had looked the quiet, mild, dejected creature that harsh treatment had made him, but his spirit was roused at last. The cruel insult had set his blood on fire. His breast heaved, and he defied his tormentor with an energy he had never known before. "He'll murder me," blubbered Noah. "Charlotte, missus, here's the new boy a-murdering of me. Help, help, Oliver's gone mad, Charlotte." His cries brought the fat maidservant running to the scene. "Oh, you little wretch," screamed Charlotte, seizing Oliver with her utmost force, which was about equal to that of a strong man in good training. "Oh, you little ungrateful, murderous, horrid villain." And between every syllable Charlotte gave Oliver a blow with all her might, accompanying it with a scream, for the benefit of society. Charlotte's fist was by no means a light one, but lest it should not be effectual in calming Oliver's wrath, Mrs. Sowerberry plunged into the kitchen and assisted to hold him with one hand while she scratched his face with the other. In this favorable position of affairs, Noah rose from the ground and pommeled him behind. This was rather too violent exercise to last long. When they were all three wearied out and could tear and beat no longer, they dragged Oliver, struggling and shouting but nothing daunted, into the dust cellar, and there locked him up. This being done, Mrs. Sowerberry sank into a chair and burst into tears. "Oh, Charlotte," she cried, "what a mercy we have not all been murdered in our beds with such a little villain in the house." And when Mr. Sowerberry presently came home, he gave Oliver a whipping on his own account for good measure. It was not until he was left alone in the silence and stillness of the cellar that Oliver gave way to the feelings which the day's treatment had awakened. He had listened to their taunts with a look of contempt. He had borne the lash without a cry, for he felt that pride swelling in his heart which would have kept down a shriek to the last, though they had roasted him alive. But now, when there was none to see or hear him, he fell upon his knees on the floor, and hiding his face in his hands, wept bitter tears. For a long time, Oliver remained motionless in this attitude. The candle was burning low in the socket when he rose to his feet. Having gazed cautiously round him and listened intently, he gently undid the fastenings of the door and looked abroad. It was a cold, dark night. The stars seemed, to the boy's eyes, farther from the earth than he had ever seen them before. There was no wind, and the somber shadows thrown by the trees upon the ground looked sepulchral and deathlike, from being so still. He softly reclosed the door. He resolved to run away in the early morning, to go to that great city of London. With the first ray of light that struggled through the crevices in the shutters, Oliver arose and again unbarred the door. One timid look around, one moment's pause of hesitation. He had closed it behind him and was in the open street. He looked to the right and to the left, uncertain whither to fly. He remembered to have seen the wagons as they went out, toiling up the hill. He took the same route, and arriving at a footpath across the fields, which he knew led out again into the road, struck into it and walked quickly on. He was then only 10 years old. Chapter 2: Oliver Falls from Bad to Worse. It was 70 miles to London, and the poor boy made his way thither only with great difficulty. Begging was not allowed in many of the villages, and nearly everybody viewed him with doubt, or else shut the door in his face. Early on the 7th morning of his flight, Oliver limped slowly into the little town of Barnet, near the outskirts of London. The window shutters were closed, the street was empty, and the boy sank down with bleeding feet and covered with dust upon a doorstep. By degrees the shutters were opened, the window blinds were drawn up, and people began passing to and fro. Some few stopped to gaze at Oliver for a moment or two, or turned round to stare at him as they hurried by, but none relieved him, or troubled themselves to inquire how he came there. He had no heart to beg, and there he sat. He had been crouching on the step for some time when he was roused by observing that a boy, who had passed him carelessly some minutes before, had returned, and was now surveying him most earnestly from the opposite side of the way. He took little heed of this at first, but the boy remained in the same attitude of close observation so long that Oliver raised his head and returned his steady look. Upon this the boy crossed over, and, walking close up to Oliver, said, "Hullo, my covey, what's the row?" The boy who addressed this inquiry was about his own age, but one of the queerest-looking fellows Oliver had ever seen. He was a snub-nosed, flat-browed, common-faced boy enough, and as dirty as one would wish to see, but he had about him all the airs and manners of a man. He was short of his age, with rather bow legs and little, sharp, ugly eyes. He wore a man's coat, which reached nearly to his heels. He had turned the cuffs back, halfway up his arm, to get his hands out of the sleeves, apparently with the ultimate view of thrusting them into the pockets of his corduroy trousers, for there he kept them. He was altogether as swaggering a young gentleman as ever stood 4 feet 6, or something less, in his shoes. "Hullo, my covey, what's the row?" said this strange young gentleman to Oliver. "I am very hungry and tired," replied Oliver, the tears standing in his eyes as he spoke. "I have walked a long way. I have been walking these 7 days." The boy looked at him narrowly and asked him some questions. He took Oliver for a vagrant or worse, but led him into a small tavern and gave him a feast of ham and bread. And Oliver, falling to at his new friend's bidding, made a long and hearty meal, during the progress of which the strange boy eyed him from time to time with great attention. "Going to London?" said the strange boy, when Oliver had at length concluded. "Yes." "Got any lodgings?" "No." "Money?" "No." The strange boy whistled, and put his arms into his pockets as far as the big coat sleeves would let them go. "Do you live in London?" asked Oliver. "Yes, I do when I'm at home," replied the strange boy. "Want to go along with me? I know an old gentleman as lives there what'll give you lodgings for nothink." The unexpected offer was too tempting to be resisted, especially when Oliver was told that the old gentleman would doubtless get him a good place without loss of time. This led to a more friendly and confidential chat, in which Oliver learned that his new friend's name was Jack Dawkins, commonly called the Artful Dodger. As Dawkins objected to entering London before nightfall, it was nearly 11 o'clock before he piloted Oliver down some of the worst streets of the city's worst section. Finally, they entered a tumble-down building and groped their way up a rickety stairway. Then Dawkins threw open the door of a back room and drew Oliver in after him. The walls and ceiling of the room were perfectly black with age and dirt. There was a deal table before the fire, upon which were a candle stuck in a bottle, some pewter pots, bread and butter. Several rough beds were huddled side by side upon the floor. Seated around the table were 4 or 5 boys, none older than the Dodger, smoking long clay pipes and drinking spirits with the air of middle-aged men. But the chief figure was an old shriveled Jew, whose villainous face was offset by a mass of matted red hair. He was dressed in a greasy flannel gown and was busily at work frying sausages over a fire. The boys crowded around Dawkins as he whispered a few words in the ear of the Jew. Then they all turned, as did the Jew, and grinned at Oliver. "This is him, Fagin," said Jack Dawkins, "my friend Oliver Twist." The Jew made a low bow to Oliver, took him by the hand, and hoped he should have the honor of his intimate acquaintance. Upon this, the young gentleman with the pipes came round him, and shook both his hands very hard, especially the one in which he held his little bundle. One young gentleman was very anxious to hang up his cap for him, and another was so obliging as to put his hands in Oliver's pockets, in order that, as he was very tired, he might not have the trouble of emptying them himself when he went to bed. "We are very glad to see you, Oliver, very," said the Jew. "Dodger, take off the sausages and draw a tub near the fire for Oliver." Oliver ate his share, and the Jew then mixed him a glass of hot gin and water, telling him he must drink it off directly, because another gentleman wanted the tumbler. Oliver did as he was desired. Immediately afterwards, he felt himself gently lifted on to one of the sacks, and then he sank into a deep sleep. The next morning, Oliver watched the Jew, Dawkins, and Charlie Bates, another of the boys, play a curious game. The old man would place a purse and other valuables in his pockets, whereupon the boys would try to slip them out without his knowledge. Oliver didn't understand in the least what it was all about, even when Fagin gave him some lessons in the same game. But he was to learn with a shock, a few days later, when Bates and Dawkins took him with them for a walk about town. They were just emerging from a narrow court not far from the open square in Clerkenwell, when the Dodger made a sudden stop, and, laying his finger on his lip, drew his companions back again with the greatest caution. "What's the matter?" demanded Oliver. "Hush," replied the Dodger. "Do you see that old cove at the bookstall?" "The gentleman over the way?" said Oliver. "Yes, I see him." "He'll do," said the Dodger. "A prime plant," observed Master Charlie Bates. Oliver looked from one to the other with surprise, but he was not permitted to make any inquiries, for the two boys walked stealthily across the road and slunk close behind the old gentleman. Oliver walked a few paces after them, and not knowing whether to advance or retire, stood looking on in silent amazement. The gentleman was a very respectable-looking person who had taken up a book from the stall and was reading away as hard as if he were in his own study. What was Oliver's horror and alarm as he stood a few paces off, looking on with his eyelids as wide open as they would possibly go, to see the Dodger plunge his hand into the gentleman's pocket and draw from thence a handkerchief, to see him hand the same to Charlie Bates, and finally to behold them both running away round the corner at full speed. Oliver saw in a flash that they were pickpockets, and that he would be classed among them. He turned to run, the worst possible thing to do, for just then the gentleman missed his handkerchief and glanced around in time to see Oliver scudding away for dear life, and shouting, "Stop thief!" made off after him, book in hand. He was not alone in the cry, for Bates and Dawkins, willing to divert attention from themselves, also shouted "Stop thief!" and joined in the pursuit like good citizens. "Stop thief! Stop thief!" There is a magic in the sound. The tradesman leaves his counter and the carman his wagon, the butcher throws down his tray, the baker his basket, the milkman his pail, the errand boy his parcels, the schoolboy his marbles. Away they run, pell-mell, helter-skelter, slapdash, tearing, yelling, screaming, and knocking down the passengers as they turn the corners. "Stop thief! Stop thief!" The cry is taken up by 100 voices and the crowd accumulates at every turning. Away they fly, splashing through the mud and rattling along the pavements. Up go the windows, outrun the people, and lend fresh vigor to the cry, "Stop thief! Stop thief!" Stopped at last, a well-aimed blow laid Oliver upon the pavement. Then a policeman seized him by the collar, and he was hustled off for trial before a magistrate. The magistrate was a surly boor who was in the habit of committing prisoners to jail with the merest pretense of a trial. It did not take him long to decide that Oliver was a hardened criminal, in spite of the protests of the kindly old gentleman whose pocket had been picked. And the boy was, in fact, being carried away in a fainting condition, when the bookseller whose shop had been the scene of action and who had witnessed the whole thing rushed in and declared Oliver's innocence. The poor child was thereupon released, and the old gentleman, Mr. Brownlow by name, was so sorry for him, and so taken by his frank face, that he took him to his own home and nursed him through a severe illness, the result of all his early privations and recent trouble. Mr. Brownlow even thought of adopting him, and as soon as he was well enough, let him have books to read out of his own well-stocked library, greatly to the eager Oliver's delight. Sikeshadhim by the collar. Sikeshadhim by the collar. It did indeed seem as though the sky had cleared for the boy, but instead still darker days were threatening. Fagin the Jew heard of Oliver's escape with fear and anger. He knew that it would never do for the boy to tell what he knew about the thieves' den. Their one chance of safety lay in seizing him again and making him a thief like themselves, so that his mouth would be closed. So Fagin called to his aid a burglar, a big, brutal fellow named Bill Sikes, who always went around with a knotted stick and a surly dog. Nancy, a poor girl of the streets, was also put upon the search, and soon their united efforts were successful. One day after Oliver had begun to grow strong, he was sent by Mr. Brownlow on an errand to a bookshop. He was well dressed in a new suit, and had some books and a £5 note of Mr. Brownlow's. It was not far, but he accidentally turned down a by-street that was not exactly in his way. He started to turn back, when he heard a girl's voice screaming, "Oh, my dear brother." And he had hardly looked up to see what the matter was, when he was stopped by having a pair of arms thrown tight around his neck. "Don't," cried Oliver, struggling. "Let go of me. Who is it? What are you stopping me for?" The only reply to this was a great number of loud lamentations from the young woman who had embraced him, and who had a little basket and a large key in her hand. "Oh, my gracious," said the young woman, "I've found him. Oh, Oliver, Oliver, oh, you naughty boy, to make me suffer such distress on your account. Come home, dear, come. Oh, I've found him. Thank gracious goodness heavens, I've found him." With these exclamations, the young woman burst into another fit of crying. "What's the matter, ma'am?" inquired a woman. "Oh, ma'am," replied the girl, "he ran away near a month ago from his parents, who are hard-working and respectable people, and went and joined a set of thieves and bad characters, and almost broke his mother's heart." "Young wretch," said the woman. "I'm not," replied Oliver, greatly alarmed. "I don't know her. I haven't any sister or father and mother either. I'm an orphan. I live at Pentonville." "Oh, only hear him, how he braves it out," cried the young woman. "Why, it's Nancy," exclaimed Oliver, who had known her at the Jew's, and now saw her face for the first time. "You see he knows me," cried Nancy, appealing to the bystanders. "He can't help himself. Make him come home, there's good people, or he'll kill his dear mother and father and break my heart." "What the devil's this?" said a man, bursting out of a beer shop with a white dog at his heels. "Young Oliver, come home to your poor mother, you young dog, come home directly." "I don't belong to them, I don't know them. Help, help," cried Oliver, struggling in the man's powerful grasp. "Help," repeated the man. "Yes, I'll help you, you young rascal. What books are these? You've been a-stealing 'em, have you? Give 'em here." With these words, the man tore the volumes from his grasp and struck him on the head. "That's right," cried a looker-on from a garret window. "That's the only way of bringing him to his senses." "To be sure," cried a sleepy-faced carpenter, casting an approving look at the garret window. "It'll do him good," said the woman. "And he shall have it too," rejoined the man, administering another blow and seizing Oliver by the collar. "Come on, you young villain. Here, Bullseye, mind him, boy, mind him." Weak from his recent illness, and with no one in the idle crowd to befriend him, poor Oliver could only suffer himself to be led away sobbing. Bill Sikes saw his advantage, and pushed him rapidly down the street. Then, turning to Oliver, he commanded him to take hold of Nancy's hand. "Do you hear?" growled Sikes, as Oliver hesitated and looked round. They were in a dark corner, quite out of the track of passengers. Oliver saw, but too plainly, that resistance would be of no avail. He held out his hand, which Nancy clasped tight in hers. "Give me the other," said Sikes. "Here, Bullseye." The dog looked up and growled. "See here, boy," said Sikes, putting his other hand to Oliver's throat. "If he speaks ever so soft a word, hold him. 500 ye mind." The dog growled again, and, licking his lips, eyed Oliver as if he were anxious to attach himself to his windpipe without delay. And in this fashion Oliver saw with unspeakable horror that he was being taken back to the Jew. What would the trusting Mr. Brownlow think of him? What, indeed? The hot tears blinded Oliver's eyes at the bare thought. Presently they arrived before the house but found it perfectly dark. "Let's have a glim," said Sikes, "or we shall go breaking our necks or treading on the dog. Look after your legs if you do, that's all." "Stand still a moment, and I'll get you one," replied a voice. The footsteps of the speaker were heard, and in another minute the form of Mr. John Dawkins, otherwise the Artful Dodger, appeared. He bore in his right hand a tallow candle stuck in the end of a cleft stick. The young gentleman did not stop to bestow any other mark of recognition upon Oliver than a humorous grin, but, turning away, beckoned the visitors to follow him. As they entered the low, dingy room, they were received with a shout of laughter. "Oh, my wig," cried Charlie Bates. "Here he is, oh cry, here he is. Oh, Fagin, look at him, Fagin, do look at him. I can't bear it, it is such a jolly game, I can't bear it. Hold me somebody while I laugh it out." With this, Master Bates laid himself flat on the floor and kicked convulsively for 5 minutes, in an ecstasy of joy. Then jumping to his feet, he snatched the cleft stick from the Dodger, and advancing to Oliver, viewed him round and round, while the Jew, taking off his nightcap, made a great number of low bows to the bewildered boy. The Artful, meantime, who seldom gave way to merriment when it interfered with business, rifled Oliver's pockets thoroughly. "Look at his togs, Fagin," said Charlie, putting the light so close to his new jacket as nearly to set him on fire. "Look at his togs, superfine cloth and the heavy swell cut. Oh my eye, what a game! And his books, too. Nothing but a gentleman, Fagin." "Delighted to see you looking so well, my dear," said the Jew, bowing with mock humility. "The Artful shall give you another suit, my dear, for fear you should spoil that Sunday one. Why didn't you write, my dear, and say you were coming? We'd have got something warm for supper." At this Master Bates roared again so loud that Fagin himself relaxed, and even the Dodger smiled. But as the Artful drew forth the 5-pound note at that instant, it is doubtful whether the sally or the discovery awakened his merriment. "Hallo, what's that?" inquired Sikes, stepping forward as the Jew seized the note. "That's mine, Fagin." "No, no, my dear," said the Jew. "Mine, Bill, mine, you shall have the books." "They belong to Mr. Brownlow," cried Oliver, wringing his hands. "Oh, pray send them back, he'll think I stole them." "The boy's right," replied Fagin with a sly wink. "He will think you've stole them." Oliver saw by his look that all chance of rescue was gone, and shrieking wildly, he made a dash for the door. But the dog arrested him with a fierce growl, while a blow laid him upon the floor. For several days Fagin kept him hid close, for fear of searching parties. Then, resolving to get the boy deeply into crime as soon as possible, he forced him to accompany Bill Sikes upon a housebreaking expedition. Accordingly, one raw evening they set forth, Oliver, Sikes, and another burglar, Toby Crackit, the ruffians threatening to shoot the boy if he so much as uttered one word. On account of his small size, he was chosen to creep through a little window of the house which was to be robbed. The opening was about 5 feet from the ground, and so small that the inmates did not think it worth while to defend it securely. But it was large enough to admit a boy of Oliver's size, nevertheless. "Now listen, you young limb," whispered Sikes, drawing a dark lantern from his pocket and throwing the glare full in Oliver's face. "I'm going to put you through there. Take this light and go softly up the steps straight afore you, and along the little hall to the street door. Unfasten it and let us in." So saying, the burglar boosted Oliver up on his back and put him through the window. "You see the stairs, don't you?" Oliver, more dead than alive, gasped out, "Yes." Sikes pointed the pistol at him and advised him to take notice that he was within shot all the way. Nevertheless, the boy had firmly resolved that, whether he died in the attempt or not, he would make one effort to dart upstairs from the hall and alarm the family. Filled with this idea, he advanced at once, but stealthily. "Come back," suddenly cried Sikes aloud. "Back, back." Scared by the sudden breaking of the dead stillness of the place, and by a loud cry which followed it, Oliver let his lantern fall, and knew not whether to advance or fly. The cry was repeated, a light appeared, a vision of two terrified half-dressed men at the top of the stairs swam before his eyes, a flash, a loud noise, a smoke, a crash somewhere but where he knew not, and he staggered back. Sikes had disappeared for an instant, but he was up again and had him by the collar before the smoke had cleared away. He fired his own pistol after the men, who were already retreating, and dragged the boy up. "Clasp your arm tighter," said Sikes as he drew him through the window. Give me a shawl here, they've hit him, quick, how the boy bleeds. Then came the loud ringing of a bell, mingled with the noise of firearms, and the shouts of men, and the sensation of being carried over uneven ground at a rapid pace. And then, the noises grew confused in the distance. A cold, deadly feeling crept over the boy's heart, and he saw or heard no more. Chapter 3. Oliver makes his way into good society. Bill Sikes and Toby Crackit were so hard-pressed that they were soon forced to leave Oliver lying in a ditch. The hue and cry passed him to one side, leaving him alone and unconscious through the long, cold night. Morning drew on apace. The rain came down thick and fast, but Oliver felt it not as it beat against him. At length a low cry of pain broke the stillness, and uttering it the boy awoke. His left arm, rudely bandaged in a shawl, hung heavy and useless at his side, and the bandage was saturated with blood. He was so weak that he could scarcely raise himself into a sitting posture. When he had at last done so, he looked feebly round for help and groaned with agony. Trembling in every joint from cold and exhaustion, he made an effort to stand upright, but, shuddering from head to foot, fell prostrate on the ground. After a short return of the stupor in which he had been so long plunged, Oliver got upon his feet and essayed to walk. His head was dizzy, and he staggered to and fro like a drunken man. But he kept up, nevertheless, and with his head drooping languidly on his breast, went stumbling onward, he knew not whither. The rain was falling heavily now, but the cold drops roused him like whiplashes. He pressed forward with the last ounce of his strength, feeling that if he stopped he must surely die, and by chance reached the same house of the attempted burglary. He knew the place at once, but his strength was at an end, and he sank exhausted on the little portico by the door. The servants who presently opened the door were immensely surprised to find the wounded boy, and two of them were certain he was the same who had broken into the house. But in his pitiful condition, they put him to bed and sent for a surgeon. A very kind-hearted lady, Mrs. Maylie, and her adopted niece Rose lived here. They cared for Oliver tenderly, for, like his lost friend, Mr. Brownlow, they were greatly taken by his open face, and believed in him despite the strange story which he presently found strength to tell. With the aid of their friend the surgeon, they convinced the servants that a mistake had been made, and so Oliver was not taken to jail. Instead, he was received into this kindly home, and it really seemed that now his dark days were over at last. Oliver resumed the study of his beloved books, which he had begun with Mr. Brownlow. But he also spent much time in the open fields, and soon grew sturdy and strong, with the brown look of health in his face. Between him and Rose Maylie, a tender affection sprang up. He was, in fact, her devoted knight. One beautiful evening, when the first shades of twilight were beginning to settle upon the earth, Oliver sat at his window, intent upon his books. He had been poring over them for some time, and, as the day had been uncommonly sultry, and he had exerted himself a great deal, by slow degrees he fell asleep. There is a kind of sleep that steals upon us sometimes, which, while it holds the body prisoner, does not free the mind from a sense of things about it, or enable it to ramble at its pleasure. Oliver knew perfectly well that he was in his own little room, that his books were lying on the table before him, that the sweet air was stirring among the creeping plants outside. And yet he was asleep. Suddenly the scene changed, the air became close and confined, and he thought with a glow of terror that he was in the Jew's house again. There sat the hideous old man in his accustomed corner, pointing at him and whispering to another man with his face averted who sat beside him. "Hush, my dear," he thought he heard the Jew say, "it is he, sure enough, come away." He, the other man, seemed to answer. "Could I mistake him, think you? If a crowd of ghosts were to put themselves into his exact shape, and he stood among them, there is something that would tell me how to point him out." The man seemed to say this with such dreadful hatred, that Oliver awoke with the fear and started up. Good heaven, what was that which sent the blood tingling to his heart, and deprived him of his voice and of power to move? There, at the window close before him, so close that he could have almost touched him before he started back. With his eyes peering into the room and meeting his, there stood the Jew. And beside him were the scowling features of a dark man whom Oliver had seen only once but had instinctively learned to fear. It was but an instant, a glance, a flash before his eyes, and they were gone. But they had recognized him, and he them. He knew they were once again lying in wait to seize him, and that his days of peace and happiness were numbered. Voice and motion came back to him with the fear, and leaping from the window he called loudly for help. Nevertheless, no trace of Fagin or the stranger could be found, though the search was pursued with haste. and Oliver's friends were forced to believe that it had been only a feverish dream. But Oliver had not been mistaken. The two figures at the window were really Fagin and a man named Monks, who for some mysterious reason had been the boy's most vindictive enemy. It was he who had found Oliver again and reported the fact to Fagin, and together they laid cunning plans to get him once more into their clutches. At this critical moment in Oliver's welfare, an unexpected friend to him appeared in the person of Nancy, the street girl. She had bitterly repented her share in kidnapping him from Mr. Brownlow, and now longed for a chance to do him some service. The chance offered, when she happened to overhear the interview between Monks and the Jew. She could not understand all she heard, but she realized that the boy was in great danger unless she acted at once. Hastening to the home of Rose Maylie, Nancy contrived to see her alone and repeated word for word the conversation she had overheard. From the dark threats of this man Monks, it seemed that Oliver's very life was in danger, because of some secret connected with his birth. Nancy knew that it meant her own death also if her visit to Miss Maylie became known, but she could not remain silent. Miss Maylie listened to her story with horror and amazement. She realized that something must be done quickly, but did not know to whom to turn. In her perplexity, Oliver made a discovery of great value to both of them. On the very day of Nancy's hurried visit and no less hurried departure, he came running in, his eyes all aglow with excitement. "I have seen him," he exclaimed excitedly. "I knew that if I kept on looking, I should find him again one day. I mean the gentleman who was so good to me, Mr. Brownlow." "Where?" asked Rose. "Getting out of a coach," replied Oliver. "I didn't have the chance to speak to him, but I took the number of the house he went into. Here it is," and he flourished a scrap of paper delightedly. "Oh, let us go there at once." Rose read the address eagerly and decided to put the discovery to account. Not alone would Oliver be gratified, but Mr. Brownlow might be the very friend they needed at this momentous time. "Quick," she said, "tell them to fetch a hackney coach and be ready to go with me. I will take you there directly, without a minute's loss of time. I will only tell my aunt that we are going out for an hour and be ready as soon as you are." Oliver needed no prompting to hasten, and in little more than 5 minutes they were on their way. When they arrived at the address noted, Rose left Oliver in the coach, under pretense of preparing his friend to receive him, and sending up her card by the servant, requested to see Mr. Brownlow on very pressing business. The servant soon returned, to beg that she would walk upstairs, and following him into an upper room, Miss Maylie was presented to an elderly gentleman of benevolent appearance, in a bottle green coat. "Dear me," said the gentleman, hastily rising with great politeness, "I beg your pardon, young lady. I imagined it was some importunate person who, I beg you will excuse me. Be seated, pray." "Mr. Brownlow, I believe, sir," said Rose. "That is my name." "I shall surprise you very much, I have no doubt," said Rose, naturally embarrassed. "But you once showed great kindness to a very dear young friend of mine, and I am sure you will take an interest in hearing of him again." "Indeed," said Mr. Brownlow. "Oliver Twist, as you knew him," said Rose. Mr. Brownlow was naturally surprised, but said nothing for a few moments. Then looking straight into her eyes, he remarked quietly but earnestly, "Believe me, my dear young lady, if you can tell me good news of that child, or lift the shadow which rests upon his name, you will be doing me the greatest service." Rose at once related in a few words all that had befallen Oliver since leaving Mr. Brownlow's house, how he had searched for him but had only seen him that very day, and finally of the new danger which threatened the boy. You may believe that Mr. Brownlow sat very straight, upon the extreme edge of his chair, during the latter part of this recital. "The poor lad," he exclaimed, "but why have you not brought him with you? I wish to talk with you alone about this plot. He does not know of it, but, smilingly, I believe he is now waiting in the coach at the door." "At this door?" cried Mr. Brownlow, and without another word he rushed from the room. In less than a minute he was back again, lugging Oliver in bodily and both laughing, yes, and shedding tears at the same time. Then, after the jolliest of visits, Rose and Oliver took their leave for the present, but not before Mr. Brownlow had told Rose privately that he would turn his whole attention to the new conspiracy. Nancy had promised to meet Rose on London Bridge, a few nights later, and Mr. Brownlow determined to be there also. In the meantime, he made other plans for capturing the rogues. Chapter 4: The End of Evil Days. Now, unbeknown to Nancy, Fagin the Jew had become suspicious of her and had set a spy upon her heels. This spy was none other than Noah Claypole, the undertaker's apprentice, whom Oliver had so soundly thrashed. Noah had lately come to London to try his fortune in any underhand way that might arise. The Jew was always on the lookout for just such fellows as he, so they soon struck a bargain. On the night when Nancy set forth to keep her appointment on the bridge, Noah was kept busy darting from pillar to post, but all the time keeping her in sight. When she met Rose and Mr. Brownlow, the spy quickly slunk behind an abutment where he could hear every word of what she said. And you may be sure he lost no time in taking his story back to the Jew. Bill Sikes had just returned in the early morning from a housebreaking jaunt and was as usual in an ugly mood. A word from the Jew about Nancy's defection set his brain on fire with hatred against the girl. He hastened to her room and, disregarding all her appeals for mercy, struck her lifeless to the floor. This murder proved the beginning of the end for all the gang. Mr. Brownlow had already set the police to work, and now offered a large personal reward for Sykes's arrest. The murderer was tracked in and about the city for several days, until he finally hung himself in endeavoring to escape from the roof of a house. Fagin the Jew was captured at last, and for his share in this crime and his other wickednesses was condemned to death. A great popular clamor had been aroused against him, and he was to be hung without delay. In the hope that the Jew would throw some light upon monks and some secret papers which Mr. Brownlow had traced, that gentleman took Oliver with him to the prison to see Fagin on his last night upon earth. "Is the young gentleman to come too, sir?" said the man whose duty it was to conduct them. "It's not a sight for children, sir." "It is not indeed, my friend," rejoined Mr. Brownlow, "but my business with this man is intimately connected with him, and as this child has seen him in the full career of his success and villainy, I think it well, even at the cost of some pain and fear, that he should see him now." These few words had been said apart so as to be inaudible to Oliver. The man touched his hat, and glancing at Oliver with some curiosity, opened another gate, opposite to that by which they had entered, and led them on, through dark and winding ways, to the cell. The condemned criminal was seated on his bed, rocking himself from side to side, with a countenance more like that of a snared beast than the face of a man. His mind was evidently wandering to his old life, for he continued to mutter, without appearing conscious of their presence otherwise than as a part of his vision. "Good boy, Charlie, well done," he mumbled. "Oliver too, ha ha ha, Oliver too, quite the gentleman now, quite the take that boy away to bed." The jailer took the disengaged hand of Oliver, and, whispering to him not to be alarmed, looked on without speaking. "Take him away to bed," cried the Jew. "Do you hear me, some of you? He has been the somehow the cause of all this." "Fagin," said the jailer. "That's me," cried the Jew, falling, instantly, into the attitude of listening he had assumed upon his trial. "An old man, my lord, a very old man." "Here," said the turnkey, laying his hand upon his breast to keep him down. "Here somebody wants to see you, to ask you some questions, I suppose. Fagin, are you a man?" "I shan't be one long," replied the Jew, looking up with a face retaining no human expression but rage and terror. "Strike them all dead, what right have they to butcher me?" As he spoke he caught sight of Oliver and Mr. Brownlow. Shrinking to the farthest corner of the seat, he demanded to know what they wanted there. "Steady," said the turnkey, still holding him down. "Now, sir, tell him what you want, quick if you please, for he grows worse as the time gets on." "You have some papers," said Mr. Brownlow, advancing, "which were placed in your hands for better security by a man called Monks." "It's all a lie together," replied the Jew. "I haven't one, not one." "For the love of God," said Mr. Brownlow solemnly, "do not tell a lie now, upon the very verge of death, but tell me where they are. You know that Sikes is dead, and that there is no hope of any farther gain. Where are those papers?" "Oliver," cried the Jew, beckoning to him, "here, let me whisper to you." "I am not afraid," said Oliver in a firm voice, as he relinquished Mr. Brownlow's hand. "The papers," said the Jew, drawing him towards him, "are in a canvas bag in a hole a little way up the chimney in the top front room. I want to talk to you, my dear. I want to talk to you." Yes, returned Oliver. "Let me say a prayer. Do, let me say one prayer. Say only one upon your knees with me, and we will talk till morning." Outside, replied the Jew, pushing the boy before him towards the door and looking vacantly over his head. "Say I've gone to sleep, they'll believe you. You can get me out if you take me so. Now then, now then. Oh, God forgive this wretched man, cried the boy with a burst of tears. That's right, said the Jew. That'll help us on, this door first. If I shake and tremble as we pass the gallows, don't you mind, but hurry on. Now, now, now. Have you nothing else to ask him, sir? Inquired the turnkey. No other question, replied Mr. Brownlow. If I hoped we could recall him to a sense of his position. Nothing will do that, sir, replied the man, shaking his head. You had better leave him. The door of the cell opened, and the attendants returned. Press on, cried the Jew, softly but not so slow, faster, faster. The men laid hands upon him, and disengaging Oliver from his grasp, held him back. He struggled with the power of desperation for an instant, and then sent up cry upon cry that penetrated even those massive walls and rang in their ears until they reached the open yard. And this, thought Oliver shudderingly, was the last of the Jew, the man from whose clutches he had so narrowly escaped. Noah Claypole turned state's evidence at this time, and thus escaped the law. Dawkins, the artful dodger, had been caught picking pockets and was transported from the country. Charlie Bates was so unnerved by the fate of Nancy, and the swift punishment of his companions, that he reformed and became an honest, hard-working young man. And finally, what of Monks? He was shadowed and seized by Mr. Brownlow's agents, and proved to be none other than the half-brother of Oliver Twist. Their father was dead, but he had left a will providing for the boy also. And it was on this account that Monks had wished to get him out of the way, and had employed Fagin in trying to ruin the lad. The papers were found, as the Jew had indicated, and they not only cleared up Oliver's past history, but proved his right to a share in a considerable family estate. Mr. Brownlow had known Monks's father in their early days, and now used this knowledge to wring a full confession from the villain. Another strange secret came to light also, at this time. Rose Maylie was found to be a younger sister of Oliver's dead mother, and therefore the boy's own aunt. Not aunt, cried Oliver, when he heard this amazing but delightful news. I'll never call her aunt. Sister, my own dear sister, that something taught my heart to love so dearly from the first. Rose, dear darling Rose. And the two orphans, no longer alone but united and surrounded by loving friends, were clasped in each other's arms.